Well, we're all concerned about the economy and certainly the fiscal cliff or the fiscal slope or whatever the term is of the day concerning
Fiscal bluff.
this. There we go, the fiscal bluff. I am delighted to have with us today a gentleman I've been looking forward to talking to. Dr. Lanny Ebenstein is with us today. He's authored the book, The Indispensable Milton Friedman. And Lanny, nice to have you with us today.
It's great to be with you.
Listen, we're all watching this thing and we're kind of scratching our heads. Why can't two guys sit down and get along? I mean, what's the deal here?
Well, I guess there are different views of the future, and it's really a battle between those different views, and they're very different. So I think that's the reality that's occurring, and that's manifested in the policy differences that are on the table.
All right, so how would Milton handle this, you think?
Sure, Milton Friedman would be against higher taxes. He would say that the problem isn't that we aren't, the problem is not that we're not taxing enough. The problem is that we're spending too much. So he would be in favor of the course that would result in the least spending possible. So he would say, go over the fiscal cliff, full speed ahead. Don't worry about negative aspects. There isn't anything that's going to harm befall the economy because of this approach. Rather, the economy will do better because the deficit will be reduced. There'll be less monetization of the fiscal deficit, which would then result in inflation. So I think that Friedman would be against raising taxes and in favor of cutting spending to the maximum extent possible.
Well, it appears that the two sides on this probably won't come to some kind of an agreement or a compromise because they're both dead set about what they believe in. So going over the cliff seems to be inevitable. So now it seems the posturing is who's going to take the blame. How would Milton frame this? How would he frame this, that going over the edge, hey, wait a minute, this is a good thing?
Yeah, I think that that's the approach that has to be taken. And what I would say is that this is going to result in real spending cuts. It's going to result in modest tax increases. There will be a reduction of the deficit to a very considerable extent. And that's something that is completely appropriate. The less we spend, the more money we'll have for tax cuts in the long run. So I think that it's only good for the lowest tax rate possible in the long run to go over the fiscal cliff at this time.
All right. So do you think Milton Friedman, would you consider him like maybe an economic prophet?
Oh, I think that he was very accurate in what he foresaw. So yeah, I think that would be a good characterization of Friedman. Clearly in the 1960s, he foresaw stagflation, inflation together with high unemployment at a time that most economists didn't think that was possible. So Friedman had great insight, and he was a great economist, also a great teacher. I think that's one aspect of him that unless you really had that experience, you wouldn't know it. But he was a great public intellectual, of humor, always had new ideas. So he was someone who would have looked at our current economy and said, what are the areas that we should be focused on at this point in time rather than 30 years ago?
Would he buy you lunch?
You know what? He always said there's no such thing as a free lunch. Hell hath no fury like a bureaucrat scorned. When you stand in front of a public servant, is there any doubt who's the servant and who's the master?
Yeah.
Let's see, he said, give the government ownership of the Sahara, and in 7 years there'd be a shortage of sand. So Friedman had a great sense of humor and a real insight into the way institutions work.
How would you explain what would be advocated by him as a monetary policy?
At this point, I think Friedman would favor monetary expansion up to this point. I think he would become concerned that monetizing more of the debt, engaging in quantitative easing to the extent that we are, is going to result in inflation. So I think that, as in the case of the Great Depression, when Friedman argued that an extraordinary situation should have led to extraordinary action by the Federal Reserve Board, I think that in the case of economic circumstances, Friedman would have argued that in 2008, 2009, 2010, a more expansive monetary policy was appropriate. But again, I think at this point in time, he would be becoming increasingly concerned that the expansion in the money supply is going to result in inflation.
All right. So what do you think he would think of Obamacare and its effect?
He would be completely opposed to Obamacare. He would feel that this was the nationalization of health care in the United States, even more third-party payments for health care services, and that this would lead to less competition and the efficiency that competition brings. So Friedman would have opposed Obamacare. It's another tax on the American people. And this is not the right way to go. He also would have opposed the Obama fiscal stimulus. He felt that the fiscal policies were of definite in an economy compared to monetary policy.
All right. So you mentioned earlier fiscal bluff, fiscal cliff, fiscal slope. Given what you have done in studying his life and his policies and where you think we are yourself, some say this fiscal cliff now is nothing more than an exercise for the Democrats to raise taxes. How are you viewing this cliff?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the best way to frame the issue, is that all the cliff is about is raising taxes. If the Democrats want to do that, then just go over the cliff. Don't give them the votes along with it. Better for it to be seen as solely their activity, and then the spending cuts being what the Republicans have taken. That's the better way to go, and I think that that would lead to real change in the economy and a significant reduction of the federal deficit. There's no other way we're going to get a significant reduction of the federal deficit, particularly in the next 3 years or so, without going over the fiscal cliff.
Has the Republicans laid too much on the table too early?
I don't think so. I think that the proposal for some increase in the top income bracket taxation rate is appropriate, whether that's accomplished by elimination of deduction rate. There's no question that wealth and income are distributed very unequally at this point in time, so there's nothing wrong with higher taxes on the top 2% at this point. So I don't think the Republicans put too much on the table. Where they need to keep their guns are the total amount of taxes and spending cuts. What the Republicans should do is they should put forward a platform that says, we're in favor of tax cuts for working American families. We think that the personal Social Security tax should be eliminated for working families in the United States. That's the tax reduction that the Republican Party should. Then the Republican Party should favor max reduction of spending possible by Social Security and Medicare.
Wow, that's quite a proposal. What if they capitulate and say, all right, Mr. President, you can have anything you want. Let's call your bluff.
Well, I think that then you may as well go over the fiscal cliff. As I said, that's not as good a bargain because I don't think there would be the right reductions in taxes. Yeah. I don't think that spending would be reduced effectively at all.
Okay.
And therefore the deficit would very, very little impact.
All right, if you were in the room, Lanny, how would you strong-arm the Democrats into cutting expenses and maybe even reducing some of the growth of entitlements?
Yeah, I think it's about saying this is about working American families. We need to distribute more resources in our society to working American families. The way to do that is to eliminate the personal Social Security tax paid by individuals. The it's approximately 6.5%. And if each individual were no longer responsible for paying that, if they have minors under 18 for whom they're responsible for, that would do a great deal for families in our society, and it would reduce the amount of revenue that government receives. Where the spending should be cut is on senior citizens. It should be cut on Social Security. It should be cut on Medicare. Senior citizens receive too many resources in our society at this point in time, and it's time that they don't continue to receive the share of resources that they've been receiving.
Well, the book is entitled The Indispensable Milton Friedman, Essays on Politics and Economics. Actually, Lanny, you broke the book into two parts, politics and economics. Much to learn from this man, isn't there?
No question, Friedman's views remain as relevant today in many respects as when he first wrote them. Some of the essays go back to 1950, and they all cover his entire career until his death in 2006. So it's a great collection. There have been many great economists, but none greater than Milton Friedman. So he was really an indispensable figure, and reading a collection of essays by Milton Friedman is always a good idea.
No question about it. Great education. Well, Dr. Ebenstein, thank you so much for your time. A fascinating book. I can't wait to get into it a little bit deeper. Thanks for your work. So let's stay in touch. Love to have you back as things begin to unfold. When we're on the other side of the cliff, maybe you can give us a temperature reading.
That'd be great. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay.